I understand that I stand between you and dinner. And even though you're a UN ambassador, and once you're given a mic, you'll be lucky you get the mic away from you after 1 hour. But I won't do that to you. But let me begin first of all by thanking Dr. B.K. Modi for inviting me here for this splendid forum. I grew up in this part of Singapore, and you may not believe this. Right here, on this soil, in Jalan Ubi, were some of the poorest people living in Singapore. And this was probably poorer than Harlem in some ways. See, what you see today is a story of Singapore in some ways. And now it's been transformed. And I actually believe that if you do support Dr. Modi's mission of one world, the transformation of this soil here, and I used to come here, by the way, as a child, from extreme poverty to this vision of the future, I believe can be the path that the world can take. Now, my specialty is the state of the world, and I normally speak about it in about 60 minutes. I'm going to try and give you a 3-minute version, or 3 to 5 minute version, in 3 points. The first point is that, I know you're all going to check your, whatever it is, iPhones, Blackberries, or Samsung, to check whether or not the rupiah has gone down, whether the rupee has gone down, and the world seems a very dangerous place, which is why my first point is about good news. And it's actually surprising how few people realize that the world we live in today is much, much better than it has ever been. And to give you just 3 indicators of good news, for most of human history, the number one thing you worried about was being killed in wars. Guess what? The chances of dying in an interstate war today are the lowest it has ever been since statistics have been kept. Peace has come, even though you may not believe it if you turn on the BBC or the CNN. There are exceptions in Syria and Somalia and Afghanistan, but the exceptions are a drop in the ocean. The second piece of good news is that Dr. Modi was talking about meeting Ban Ki-moon and the UN Secretary General. The UN has set several Millennium Development Goals to be achieved by 2015. Many will not be achieved. But one goal of halving global poverty by 2015, 2 years from now, will be met. Not just will be met, will be exceeded. And the United States National Intelligence Council has predicted that by 2030, absolute global poverty will be eliminated. And if you want a third piece of good news to cheer you up, if you look at the number of people living in middle classes, it's going to explode globally. Now, if you want to leave here with just one statistic, which is maybe a useful statistic for you to remember, is that today in all of Asia, from West Asia to East Asia, the total size of the middle class is roughly 500 million people. But by 2020, which is only 7 years from now, that middle class is going to explode from 500 million to 1.75 billion. An increase of 3.5 times in 7 years. The world has never seen anything like this before in human history. Now, before you think you've hit paradise, let me tell you the bad news. And there's, of course, lots and lots of bad news in the world, and I'm glad that Dr. Modi mentioned in my book, The Great Convergence, You'll find several chapters on the geopolitical and other challenges we face. But the fundamental challenge we face, if I can capture it with a very simple metaphor, I'll do it with what I call the boat metaphor. And the boat metaphor is this. Before humanity, 7 billion people, when they lived in 193 separate countries, it was as though they were living in 193 separate boats, with captains and crews to take care of each boat, and rules to make sure the boats didn't collide. But today, the world has been so fundamentally transformed that the 7 billion people in the world no longer live in 193 separate boats. They live in 103 separate cabins on the same boat. But there's only one problem with this boat. You have captains and crews taking care of each cabin, and no captain or crew taking care of the boat as a whole. And once you absorb that metaphor, you begin to understand why you wake up every morning worrying about the state of the world. And I'm sure I was surprised, I'm sure you were all surprised by how the rupee is collapsing, the rupiah is collapsing. And what's interesting is that this did not happen because of decisions made in New Delhi or Jakarta. It happened because of a decision made in Washington, D.C. And that perfectly illustrates how we are on the same boat. And in every dimension of human life today, we become so interconnected, whether it's in pandemics or terrorism or financial issues, we are on the same boat. So all this brings me to my last point, which is why I think the Global Citizen Forum is very important. The good news that I'm going to end with is that there is a solution. You can actually work together to make the world a better place. And you don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to create a new world government. The world government will not happen. But you can try to strengthen institutions of global governance. And just to mention one that Dr. Modi referred to, take the United Nations. I can tell you that there is one decision that the world has to make, I think about 2 years from now, that will determine the future of our world. And this is how we select the new Secretary General of the UN. The next Secretary General of the UN, take my word for it, I'll bet you money on it, will come from what they call the Western Europe and others group in the UN. Now the Europeans have provided 2 different kinds of Secretary Generals of the UN. The best Secretary General that the UN ever had was Dag Hammarskjöld, this visionary Swedish Secretary General, who was absolutely amazing. If you ever get a chance, read his writings, and you will understand the vision of one world that Dr. Modi is speaking about. He was one of the greatest leaders of the 20th century. But at the same time, the Europeans also provided, sadly, one of the worst Secretary Generals in the UN, and his name was Kurt Waldheim. So the choice we have 2 years from now, and watch the news carefully, is whether the Europeans will select someone like Dag Hammarskjöld or select someone like Kurt Waldheim. And if the world selects, and if Europe chooses a Secretary General like Dag Hammarskjöld, I guarantee you the world will be a much better place. Which is why when you set up forums like the Global Citizen Forum, you can make a difference. You can make a difference by convincing the world that we live in one world, we live on the same boat. Let's work together and pick the best possible people to run the world. Thank you very much.